Hi, Patricia. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to walk you through this presentation, and it will also be recorded for future use. But this is on school climate and culture and multi-tiered systems of support implementation, and with an emphasis of using that in the alternative education classrooms. My name is Blaire Harrison. I'm a behavioral or climate specialist here at the State Department of Ed. If you'd like a copy of this presentation, you can download that. There's a link on this slide. I'll give you a second to do that if you'd like, or you can take a picture with your cell phone and then download it in your own time. As a climate specialist here at the State Department of Ed, I work under a federal school climate transformation grant. It was a 5-year grant. We have about 3.5 years left right now on that grant. There's really 2 tracks that I work on through this grant. So one piece is that there's actually 3 other climate specialists as well, and we are regional. And at the end of this presentation, I'll show you our regional map. But we go out, we provide professional development in lots of different areas, lots of trauma-informed, multi-tiered systems of support, PBIS, which we're going to talk about today, positive behavior, prevention services. And then the other piece of my job is that I work one-on-one with about 6 school sites to implement a trauma-informed positive behavior interventions and supports. Let's talk about school climate and culture. While school climate and culture have been defined in a number of ways and at times are used interchangeably, they are 2 distinct terms that overlap and influence one another. Think of school climate as the attitude and school culture as one's personality. So when you think about your own personality, your overall habits that we built or the way that we act on a day-to-day or year-to-year basis, those typically don't change in a dramatic fashion. This is school culture. But when you think about attitude, this is something that may change for us hour to hour or even day to day. This is more school climate. One drives and determines the other. Culture is deeper than climate. It is more to the core. The culture is who you are and what you believe as a team. The climate can change throughout the year and often does when there are not strong cultural systems in place. These are some aspects of positive school climate. So positive teacher-student interactions, for students to feel safe, connected to an adult in the school building, they're engaged. We have policies built in our school that promote social, emotional, ethical, civic, and intellectual skills, knowledge, dispositions, and engagement, plus a comprehensive system to address barriers to learning and teaching in order to re-engage students who may veer off track. So school climate is the feel of the school. It's the school's attitude, the behaviors and points of view exhibited and experienced by students, teachers, or other stakeholders. It can also be described as the heart or the soul of the school. It's that feeling that either encourages teachers and students to engage and love the school and be a part of it, or rejects the school and they can disengage from it. It is the outcome of the school's norms and values. The way in which people at the school relate to and interact with one another, the way systems and policies manifest in your school building. And according to the National School Climate Center, school climate includes major spheres of school life like safety, relationships, teaching and learning, as well as the environment at a larger organizational pattern. These dimensions not only shape how students feel about being in school, but these larger group trends shape learning and student development over time. We know that when students feel safe, supported, respected, and valued in their environment, that foundation is set for them to learn and achieve at their best. So we're really focusing again on investing in our people, building our relationships, creating a shared vision, and that vision needs to be clear for students, staff, and the overall school community. That sets the tone for our building. And then some aspects of school culture: clear, appropriate, and consistent expectations and consequences to address disruptive student behaviors, collaborative relationships between the school leader and the faculty, as well as between faculty members, focus on learning and high expectations for student achievement, and decrease teacher turnover and increase teacher satisfaction. And the students can see this. They pick up on that overall feel of the environment between the teachers. We're going to move into talking about how multi-tiered systems of support works into school climate and culture, and how we can use this for the benefit of our students in our school buildings. A multi-tiered system of support is a systemic, continuous improvement framework. It's not necessarily a curriculum or a program, it's a framework in which data-based problem solving and decision-making is practiced across all levels of the educational system for supporting students. The framework of MTSS is a way of doing business. So this is kind of the basic breakdown of what MTSS is. You typically have an academic side and a behavioral side. So in academics, if you've heard of RTI, or response to intervention, down here at this green level of the triangle, that is our tier 1. So that's where we are implementing, again, I'm still referring to academics here, but that's where we're implementing and teaching our lessons on a daily basis that 100% of our student population would receive. And then at tier 2, this yellow portion, we're just targeting, that's where we're going to start pulling out small groups of students that need some additional help. And you'll see back on the screen part where it has an 80%, even though 100% of our student population is receiving, the everyday curriculum and lessons, only about 80% will find full success with that. So you'll have about 10 to 15% that need a little bit more targeted intervention. And then you'll have about 1 to 5% of your student population that will need some more intensive interventions. So pulling a child in for one-on-one tutoring. And then the behavioral side of MTSS is typically referred to as PBIS, or positive behavior interventions and supports. And it's very similar to RTI, except now we're shifting our focus over to behavior. So universal interventions, you provide those to 100% of your student population. But again, you can only expect about 80% of your students to be successful by putting in place those behavioral supports. You will have about 10 to 15% of your student population that needs a little bit more. So just like we were pulling small groups out on the academic side, we can do the same thing for behavior and put supports in place for that 10 to 15%. So that might be like a check-in or check-out system. And then again, you're gonna have about 1 to 5% that need that very intensive one-on-one behavior intervention. So this is where we start talking about functional behavior assessments and putting them on a behavior improvement plan or a BIP, possibly putting them on a different kind of behavior contract, developing a lagging skills plan to help them be successful. A multi-tiered system of support helps schools and districts to organize resources through alignment of academic standards and behavioral expectations. It's implemented with fidelity, and it is sustained over time in order to enable for every child to successfully reach their potential or be successful. You have that academic side and that behavioral side. Other pieces that can fall under the behavioral side, and sometimes when you're seeing a triangle, or this will be referred to as an MTSS umbrella, and you'll see all the pieces that fall under the umbrella. You'll have a third piece to the triangle or under the umbrella, which is academics, behavior, and then social emotional, and then sometimes the social emotional goes under the behavior. So depending on how you look at that, under that behavioral side, you may be addressing school-wide behaviors such as attendance and truancy, your daily behavior concerns, discipline, social emotional learning, possibly implementing some trauma-informed practices and prevention services like bullying, substance abuse, and suicide prevention. Again, if you look up or Google MTSS umbrella, you'll find lots of examples of different initiatives that can align into your MTSS framework. If you are implementing any other on your own, if you're implementing any academic or behavioral pieces with success currently, there's no need to stop what you're doing to start MTSS. You can build in multi-tiered systems of support and just align in any other initiatives that you're currently working with in your school building. Our goal with MTSS is really to break down those silos between academics, behavior, and social emotional, and just kind of shift away from viewing them as separate pieces and more trying to align them for student benefit of how do these pieces all work together. So connecting climate culture to MTSS, kind of continuing on from what I was talking about on the last slide, we know that multi-tiered systems of support create this positive culture in our school. The positive outcomes in behavior, academics, and social emotional learning become the climate of the school. And the climate is the measure and culture is the change agent. We can't change the climate or environment of a student's home or what happens when they walk out of our building at the end of the day. But when they are with us, we can create a climate at school that encourages all students, those that have experienced adversity at home or in the community, those that possibly come with trauma in their background or experiencing chronic stress. We can connect those kids and help them feel loved and be successful in our building. And we can create a climate where teachers see the difference they are making. Through implementing MTSS, this is a process that can take years to fully implement in your building. This is not going to be an overnight, I'm going to hand you a scripted guide and you can do this tomorrow. You know, it takes a long time to really implement this change, but through slow changes and building in pieces over time, you can implement MTSS into your building quite easily. These systems have been proven many times to be the cultural change agent, and the culture of your school encourages that high achievement. These cultural changes will drive your climate, which is experienced by both teachers and students every single day. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a short video. This is Principal Barute Kafele. He has written extensively on professional development strategies for positive school climate and culture. He discusses a lot about transforming the attitudes of at-risk students, motivating students to excel in classrooms, and school leadership practices for inspiring school-wide excellence. He has lots of books available. There's lots of information on his website. I definitely encourage you to check him out.
See, there are two words, folks: climate, culture. Some of us will try to raise achievement levels and get young people to soar in a toxic climate and culture. See, it doesn't work. And when I say climate and culture, climate first, I mean the mood of the school, the mood of the classroom. See, I don't mean individual moods of individual folks in a building. I mean the building has a mood, and the mood will dictate whether or not children are going to be successful. So when we consciously shape and mold the mood of the school, and we say this is going to be a mood of excellence, a mood of high expectation, a mood where it's okay to take off your mask and check it at the door and let me just be me. A mood where children can win. But then culture, which I'm defining as the lifestyle. What's the lifestyle there? I tell educators every day, when I go into schools as a consultant and I look at the adults and they do this: hey, pull your pants up, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up from 8 to 3. Pull your pants up. Pull your pants up. Hey, pull your pants up. I said, don't they look silly? I said, there's no way in the world that I will spend a day telling youngsters to pull up their pants. I am going to put structures in place so that when they walk through the door, they just know this is what they expect of me when I'm in this building.
So let's take a second to reflect on that video. He was talking about having these very explicit structures in place. Does your building, your site, the system that you currently work with, have these structures in place that explicitly lay a foundation for students to know the expectations when they walk into your building every day? What do you personally feel like is the current culture of your building? What would you say is the current climate or the attitude of your building? If you're an administrator, do you feel like the staff would agree with your thoughts on the current culture and climate inside your building? Do you think they'd have some different thoughts? And then what about your students? Do you think your students would agree with you, or do you think your students see it in a completely different way? I want to kind of shift over now. We're still talking about MTSS, and being trauma informed or trauma aware is a piece that falls into MTSS. And I want to discuss how this aligns and how this fits into our current school climate and culture. Trauma-informed work in education right now is a huge platform on the international and national stage, but we are also having very deep and meaningful conversations here in Oklahoma. We know that Superintendent Hoffmeister has made trauma-informed work her platform and is very dedicated to having Oklahoma educators implement these best practices and strategies that benefit our kids who are experiencing trauma or dealing with chronic stress, but also a lot of these strategies and ideas fit in well or work well with all kids. Trauma-informed care improves culture and climate in schools because it establishes that safe, supportive culture for all students by understanding what has happened to each student and how that affects their actions in the school. Through trauma-informed care, schools can be thoughtful in the consequences students receive, trying to avoid triggering the student and operating in ways that are considerate of the experiences that children bring with them to school every day. So, there are lots of different reasons that bring kids into an alternative education program. Some of those kids may have experienced trauma in their background, may be dealing with some of that chronic stress or some adversity. So we need to address that and how we can fit that in and make this beneficial for them. So I'm just gonna go into some of the basics of trauma-informed schools and what trauma is and adverse childhood experiences. So why do we have this big push for trauma-informed schools? Well, research tells us that students who survive trauma and grow up to be successful have identified one single variable. And that is very simple. It comes down to a caring adult who believed in them and cared about their well-being. We know that trauma-informed strategies help students feel safe and students start learning how to self-regulate. And when our kids are regulated and they're back in that prefrontal or that neocortex in their brain, those academic scores are going to come up because they are ready to learn. Their basic needs are being met. They're not dysregulated. They're not stuck down in that survival brain state. They're ready to learn. Why do we need trauma-informed schools? Well, it changes how policies are developed and implemented in schools when we're encountering traumatized students. It has a ripple effect across the school climate and culture, and it involves everyone in that school community, from administration, teachers, other staff, students, and their families. When you're talking about childhood trauma or being trauma-informed, ACEs, or adverse childhood experience, plays a huge role in that. So the definition from the CDC is that ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, that is the term that we use to describe all types of abuse, neglect, and other potentially traumatic experiences that occur to people under the age of 18. If you're already familiar with ACEs, you might already know about the ACEs survey, and the ACEs survey contains these 10 pieces. So you have physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, mental illness, incarcerated relative, substance abuse in the home, divorce in the home. It says mother treated violently, but really any domestic violence in the home. So a person can have an ACE score of 1 to 10. You can find this ACEs survey by simply searching for it online, but please do not do that right at this moment. The Oklahoma State Department of Education does not share the ACEs survey during our presentations. If you would like to take that survey, make sure that you are in a safe place, because it can be a triggering experience if these are past issues that have happened in your life. Also, the State Department recommends that the survey is never distributed or administered to students. As educators, we do not need to know a child's precise ACE score to recognize trauma in their life and start providing them the best practices. There are also many other traumatic experiences that a child may experience that are not listed on here. So for example, death of a loved one is not listed out on here. Natural disaster is not listed on here. So there are many other things that could be considered traumatic in the life of a child that are not defined on the ACEs survey. So this is not a map of ACEs in Oklahoma. This is a map of health factors or health indicators across our state, but it does correlate fairly well to the data we have on ACEs in Oklahoma. You'll notice the different shades of blue on here. Around the Oklahoma City metro area and up around the Tulsa area, it's shaded lighter blue. That's because there is more access to health services in those regions. You'll notice out mainly in far eastern Oklahoma, and there it's shaded much darker blue. And in those regions, we have some of the highest ACEs in the nation, but those are also where we find a lot of the highest ACEs in our state. We also have the densest population there, so it's a little bit easier to track ACEs than out in far western Oklahoma, which is very transient, which is why you see a lot of the lighter shaded blue on that region. We know from the ACEs survey, and if you do any research on ACEs or adverse childhood experiences, you will find that there is a very strong correlation to the higher the ACE score, the more likely to have the following issues. So you're more likely to deal with some mental health concerns, social, emotional, cognitive impairment, more likely to engage in health risk behaviors, suffer from chronic disease and disability, and even suffer from an early death. So an ACE score of 6 or higher can have a lifespan reduced by as much as 20 years. These are some more ACE score related and risk factors. Those with a 3 or higher ACE score are considered to be higher at risk or more at risk to become twice as likely to become a smoker, 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic, 10 times more likely to inject street drugs, more likely to be violent, have multiple marriages, have more drug prescriptions, more depression, broken bones, autoimmune diseases, and chronic absenteeism. So these are some ACE statistics in Oklahoma. You'll see it says 45.5% of Oklahoma students have an ACE score of 3 or more. So research that we have done in Oklahoma, any ACE studies that they have participated in, the research shows us that on average, when you're standing in front of a classroom of students, 45.5% of those students will have an ACE score. This is 3 or more, but I think the statistic really is at least 1. We have the highest percentage of youth experiencing 4 or more ACEs. Some other statistics from the Oklahoma Youth Behavior Risk Survey from Oklahoma is 21% of students were bullied on school property. Approximately 57,000 of our students reported feeling sad or hopeless. We had 34,000 students that have considered attempting suicide. 1 in 14 students recently experienced sexual dating violence. And then 79% of children and adolescents in the Office of Juvenile Affairs group homes have substance abuse problems. So this really is, I mean, just looking at this data, this really is our reason of why we need to change, why we need to be reassessing our care and our practices and our policies in our school system, because we know that we need to do better. We need to do better for student success across the state of Oklahoma. So even though you could have an ACE score from a 1 to a 10, you are not necessarily defined by that ACE score. We know that through building resilience, you can start to overcome some of the trauma or the chronic stress that you may have dealt with as a child. Resilience, though, is not inherently in children. Some things we can do to help are gaining an understanding of ACEs, going through a trauma-aware training, which our team provides. So if you are interested in bringing that to your school for free, let me know. We'd be glad to come out and provide that for your faculty. You can create environments where children feel safe emotionally and physically, helping children identify feelings and manage emotions, creating a safe physical and emotional environment in which kids can explore mistakes. So we're not saying through trauma-informed care that we're taking all the accountability off kids. No, there has to be the accountability there, but you can have logical consequences and still offer child second, third, fourth chances to correct a behavior. ACEs are only half of any equation when you try and predict a child's future. While each child is exposed to different degrees of trauma, they also have their unique set of characteristics that could protect them from trauma. So even though you may have a high ACE score, you're working with a child that has a high ACE score, that is not necessarily a guarantee of negative outcomes in life. And it's a big warning sign, but no child is doomed, or we shouldn't define a child by their ACE score. Remember, I said you don't even need to necessarily know a child's precise ACE score to understand that that child has been dealing with chronic stress in their life and that we need to implement some different supports to help them be successful. There are two crucial factors at play here: the child's own biological and developmental characteristics, or their nature, and then external influences. So that could be the educational system, family, community, and support systems. When these influences are positive, we call them protective factors. These protective factors help us explain why some people who have sustained a great deal of adversity as children fare relatively well in adulthood. So when I was first explaining why we need trauma-informed schools, we said, it comes down to this one simple variable every time. A child can be successful if they are connected to an adult, a safe adult that lays out that pathway for them to help be successful, and they have an adult that they are connected to. Like a balancing scale, so if you think of a scale with two different sides, the resilience is that result of interactions between a person's ACEs on one side and their protective factors, or the resilience and hope that they've built up, on the other side. Researchers continue to refine their understanding of these pieces, but we know again that building those relationships is the key to helping those kids be successful. So resilience is bouncing back from negative events in life. So we're not born being resilient. It has to be built up in us. And hope is wanting more out of life. So when we start talking about resilience and hope, we know that people who have higher hope are more likely to do better in life than people with lower hope. Being able to believe in yourself and others, trying to believe that you have a future when you're dealing with immense amounts of chronic stress, it can be hard to see beyond today. You're in that survival mode most of the time, and you're just trying to make it through the day. Hope scores can become more of a predictor of college success than SAT or ACT scores. Students who are low hope are usually the first students who are kicked out of school. Higher hope kids have a greater influence on lower hope kids, and peer mentoring groups work to increase hope. So, even though we are working with children that are bringing lots of baggage to the table, we can help them unpack that baggage and put in the supports in place to help them find success when they are with us. This is from Chan Hellman. He is the director of the Hope Research Center at OU in Tulsa. He also has a great book called Hope Rising that you should definitely check out. It's co-authored with Casey Gwynn. But in Chan Hellman's conceptualization of hope, there are three elements that he says are necessary in order for a person to have a high hope score. That person must be able to set a goal, see pathways to pursue and achieve those goals, and then have the mental energy or motivation to travel down the pathways toward the goal despite obstacles getting in their way. Building that resiliency. That's what the resilience is that you can keep going despite what gets in your way. So when we're talking about trauma-informed care, climate and culture in our building, using best practices, whole child is another big buzzword that's around in education right now. So you see the same pieces that I discussed earlier when we were talking about multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS. You have academics, behavioral, and social emotional. And there's a great quote that I've heard at a few conferences lately that says, you have to Maslow before you can bloom. We know that we must meet the basic needs of these students to help them be successful. The demands of the 21st century require a new approach to education to fully prepare our students, whether that's for college, career, citizenship, for whatever life brings them, once they've graduated from us. Research, practice, and common sense confirm that a whole child approach to education will develop and prepare students for the challenges and opportunities of today and tomorrow. We're addressing the students' comprehensive needs through the shared responsibility of students, families, schools, and communities. That whole child approach is an effort to transition from a focus on narrowly defining academic achievement. For so long, our traditional school model has focused in on that academic achievement, and we know now that we have to also address these behavioral and these social emotional needs of these children. So we're kind of trying to shift away from just an academic focus and promoting the long-term development and success of all children in all three of these areas. A great piece of MTSS when we're talking about that behavioral side and shifting our culture and climate in our school is putting in place a system like PBIS, or Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. So let's talk about the science of behavior. We say if we teach it, they will learn it. If a child doesn't know how to read or needs more support, we try to put those in place academically. And we'll teach her to decode, we'll build fluency, we'll sit one-on-one. When a student struggles with math, we'll teach him to add, subtract, build fluency. We know that students of all ages can and do learn better ways of behaving by being taught directly and receiving positive feedback. When a student has difficulty getting along with peers, they talk back, they disrupt class, it may be a more intensive behavior issue you're dealing with. Do we typically punish them, or do we teach them new ways to behave? So that's kind of the general gist behind PBIS, is that we can improve climate by equipping our teachers and our schools with these consistent evidence-based strategies, and we can reteach children new behaviors the same way that we have been addressing academics and trying to close the gaps on academics. We can do that with behavior. So here's the science of the brain. I did say earlier that for a child to be able to sit and learn, they have to be in this neocortex. This is where all higher order thinking takes place. They are regulated, they are ready to go. The limbic brain is this emotional brain state that you have where it's where your fear and protective responses are kept. If you become dysregulated, this is where it starts, and learning starts to be stalled out here. And then that brainstem is the survival brain state. This is where you experience that fight, flight, or freeze. You have that rise in adrenaline or cortisol into your brain. You are dysregulated. No learning can happen when you're here. So typically, this is a top-down system. So if you jump into your survival or your emotional brain state, your neocortex will step in and say, hey, it's okay, calm down, let's move on. So if I'm driving down the road and a car pulls out in front of me and it throws me off and I jump into my emotional or survival brain state, that adrenaline rises up, I slam on my brakes. My neocortex, if I'm able to self-regulate, will step in and say, it's okay. You didn't have a car wreck, let's go on down the road. When you are dealing with chronic stress or trauma, and you're in that situation where it's consistently happening in your life, we know that the more that it happens, and you're living in that emotional or survival brain state, the cortisol and adrenaline levels are staying risen up in the brain longer. So the longer that those hormone levels stay in the brain, the longer and longer it takes for it to come back down. So when you have a child that becomes dysregulated in a classroom, they are using that emotional or that survival brain state, and they are not in that neocortex. So our goal as educators is to try to get them regulated, calm down, regulated, and give them the supports that they need and move them back into that neocortex. Traditionally, I was saying earlier that our systems and our schools have focused a lot more on the academic side, and our behavior systems in school have always tended to focus more on control, containment, punishment, and exclusions. We have not always provided teachers options or directions for handling behavioral, social, and emotional issues. We are often discriminatory against children on IEPs and of minority status. So when we're focusing on that, building that positive culture and climate, this is where that PBIS comes into play. It supports that positive school climate. It's evidence-based and it's cross-cutting. It aligns with state and federal policies, and it provides tiered supports for all students. So think back to that triangle that we showed you with the green base at the bottom, and then you have the yellow and you have the red. We can teach behaviors in the same manner we teach academics, and it will help reduce disciplinary action and suspensions. A myth out there that PBIS really fits more for elementary age kids or early childhood or even for special education. But in all honesty, PBIS can and does work in all school levels. So whether we're talking early childhood, elementary, middle, high school, alternative schools, I know people that use it at home. It's a great framework to implement anytime that you're dealing or working with children. Our grant, the Federal School Climate Transformation Grant, where our team is actually working with about 30 school sites and districts across the state. And they range from 3 to 4-year-old programs all the way up through 12th grade. So it can be modified, and we're going to move into that next, modified to fit what your building or your program needs. So PBIS is a framework, just like, this goes along with what we were saying about MTSS. And PBIS is a piece in that framework of MTSS. It's not a program, it's not a curriculum, it's not just another initiative to throw onto a teacher's plate. And PBIS is a decision-making framework that guides the use of evidence-based practices to encourage pro-social behavior, improves academic performance, establishes that positive school climate and culture, and can be applied at any level. So I've put in here, I took a student population from an alternative education program around the Oklahoma City metro area that they accept about 60 students per year into their program. So we were trying to figure out what the kind of the serviceable base rate would be in alt ed versus that traditional school model. And honestly, it's really the same. And it depends on how you would modify or change this program to fit your needs. But when you're talking about a population of 60 kids at that tier 1 level, remember 100% of your population gets those needs, but about 80 to 90%, so we're about 51 kids, the base rate here would be successful with that. This may look different though in an alt ed setting. What tier 1 looks like in a traditional setting compared to alt ed, the alt ed setting is going to be much more intensified to really fit the needs that your students have. So tier 2 in an alt ed program may be more like your tier 1 in your alternative ed program. So in tier 1, this is where you're implementing those universal practices that are experienced by all students and educators across all settings to establish a predictable, consistent, positive, and safe school climate. You're just setting those school-wide expectations. The expectations are laid out. They are very explicit. They are taught. And we're just trying to lay that basic foundation. And then tier 2 is where we think back to pulling your small groups in that academic side. These are targeted practices. They're designed for groups of students who need more structure, feedback, instruction, and support than in tier 1 alone. So in an alt ed program, tier 2 may really serve as your tier 1 because you already have that smaller group setting. You're already putting in place targeted interventions for these kids. You're personalizing it to their needs. And then tier 3 is that intensive level, that very one-on-one. These interventions are put in place to meet the challenges of students who need more support than just at the first 2 tiers. It's very intensive. So again, modifying this for your program, you're going to take that intensified approach. You would scale up that traditional 3-tiered model to be more intensive. So your tier 1 in alt ed would look more like tier 2 in the traditional model, because probably most or all of your students will need that additional supports to help them. At the end of this presentation, I've put in a page or a slide of resources, and I have linked an alt ed PBIS program to this so that you can see how that particular program scaled up this model to work for them. When a school implements PBIS or trauma-informed PBIS, they start by implementing it school-wide. So there are 3 main features when we're focusing in on changing that school climate and culture. We're going to build up systems. We're going to have practices that those systems support. And then we're going to make all of our decisions based off of our data. These all work together to promote positive, predictable, safe environments for all of our kids. So these are the systems that you build. You put together a site-wide team, and you have monthly meetings with a secure outside coach that could come in and help you build up your systems. These are the practices that the systems support. So setting up school-wide expectations, teaching expected behavior, having an acknowledgement system because we want to praise that behavior any chance possible, and then responding to problematic behavior. So the boxes are outlined with a color are the practices, and the boxes filled with color are the more of the permanent products that your school would build. So you have set school-wide expectations. The product your school would build or your program would build would be behavior expectations matrix that would lay out your expectations. Then you would have posters, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, some example posters that you place around your classrooms, your hallways, anywhere in your building to help teachers and kids be reminded of those expectations. So I took this from a secondary school. So their main expectations are be respectful, be responsible, and be safe. And I've pulled out what be respectful looks like. So this is for school grounds or lunch break expectations. So being respectful on the school grounds or during lunch means that you're using appropriate language, volume, and tone. You're using kind words and actions to help others. You're respecting others' privacy, and you're following all adult directions. And I know that, this is not going to work 100% again for every child, but at least we've laid that foundation there, and we're constantly using and building off of this language to help our kids. This is more of an elementary example, but WORGA stands for work hard, act right, get along. these are their voice levels. So kids know, so this is in the cafeteria, kids know that they can use a whisper voice or a conversation level voice. That social emotional learning piece that we talked about when we were referring to, you know, those three main pieces of the whole child development, or those three main pieces in MTSS. The social and emotional learning is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions. We're setting and achieving positive goals. We're feeling and showing empathy for others, establishing and maintaining positive relationships, and making responsible decisions. So a systemic approach to SEL intentionally cultivates a caring, participatory, and equitable learning environment. And it uses these evidence-based practices that involve all students in their social, emotional, and academic growth. So this approach infuses social and emotional learning into every part of the students' daily lives, across their classrooms, during all times of the school day, even when they're in their home and community. We're just teaching some of those basic social skills to help them be successful once they leave our care. If you're not currently using a social emotional curriculum, I have linked some guides at the end on the resources slide that can show you how to compare and contrast different programs and help you find a program that's great for you. There are also several free programs out there right now that you can use. There's one called Teach Kindness, and another one is called Sanford Inspire. Sanford Harmony has a program that is more K through 6, but Sanford Inspire goes up through 12th grade. So we're talking about behavior and improving our climate and culture. We have to look at all those pieces, including our policies as well. So we know that the definition of the word discipline is to teach, not to punish. So we're trying to move away from some of those punitive consequences to using more restorative consequences. You can have accountability with consequences, but we can use logical consequences that help our kids learn from their mistakes. So using restorative circles, shame-free practices, relationship building skills, reintegration procedures, and logical consequences, counseling if possible, peer mentors and mediation, righting your wrong. And we know why punitive policies don't work for our kids. It punishes students instead of teaching replacement behaviors. It offers quick results, but it's not meaningful. It's not motivational. It leads to isolation. It doesn't use that trauma lens. It doesn't take into history or any trauma history or individual circumstances. It negatively impacts our academics. And again, it disproportionately affects minority and IEP students. So zero tolerance policies were supposed to make our schools safer and make discipline fair, but really in practice, the policies didn't help us get to the safe and welcoming school environments that we wanted. Across our country, our schools are starting to move away from these zero tolerance policies and trying to reduce the number of students that they're suspending. And the turnaround is a response to a growing amount of research that shows that these policies resulted in this disproportionate number of kids being suspended. So those punitive policies, those zero tolerance policies, they do not have positive results on the end. And the last piece of the framework for PBIS is data-based decision-making. So you build your systems, you have your practices and your products all in place. Now what? You have to use the data to be able to make this system go. We can ensure that all students' needs are being met through the practice of data. So we are in schools, we have access to lots of data. We have discipline data. We can put out school climate surveys for students, staff, and parents. We can use universal screeners. We have academic data. We can use all of that in our favor to help make sure that we're meeting the needs of these kids. We have to know how to take that data and break it down or drill into the data and use it to drive that decision-making progress or process when we're addressing the needs in our school. This is the social ecological model. You'll notice down here in the left corner, there's the academics, behavioral, and social emotional needs. The whole child model is down there again. You'll see on this SEM model that has individual, relationships, school-wide, community, and policy. all of these items, all 5 items, have to be in place for school culture to fully change. This SEM is really a public health model that is used for eliciting behavior change. So from research, this model indicates that if a school focuses on at least 3 out of those 5 areas, you're more likely to see a culture and climate shift. Preferably, you want to focus on all 5. You're planning a culture change, we cannot just focus on purchasing a curriculum. The program you purchase is only going to focus on individual relationships area of the model. We have to make sure that we have school-wide campaign, that this is a topic we're taking seriously at our school. We have community involvement through our partners, and we have policies that reflect the changes that we're wanting to see in our school. And if we do all of that, but we haven't stopped to take care of our teachers' needs, the sustainability will not be there. So when we're talking about developing an effective workforce, because our staff plays a huge role in creating our school climate and culture. If there are not policies, practices, and procedures in place to support the staff, the framework will fall apart. So we need to consider, what are we doing to meet the mental health care needs of our teachers within our capacity? What can we do for them? Are we giving our teachers the opportunity to voice their opinion about policies and practices that we're implementing in our school? Are we offering our teachers any access for professional growth? Are we helping our teachers develop self-care plans for their own mental health needs? What are we doing to meet our staff needs? There's a great book called We Have to Feed the Teachers or They'll Eat the Students. And so I put that down at the bottom. We have to feed the staff or they get hungry too. We have to meet the needs of the people that are coming into our buildings every day. If we don't, that's where you start to see that compassion fatigue and that burnout and teachers leaving the profession. So pull your staff into the decision-making process and make sure that we are meeting their needs so that everyone in our school building can be successful in changing the school climate and culture. Here are the resources they've provided. So here's some more information on ACEs and trauma-informed care. And I'll put the link back up again to access this because these are all linked in here. So if you download the presentation, you'll be able to click on these links. Chan Hellman, this takes you to his website, and this takes you to information about the Hope Rising book. Here's information about if you don't feed the teachers, they'll eat the students, and more information about PBIS. SEL's Castle Guides takes you to the handbook. There's an elementary and an early childhood version, and then there's a secondary guide to help you pick out an SEL curriculum or look more into SEL curriculums. And then down at the bottom is an example of PBIS in an alternative ed program. 2 other great resources. Go back. The other great resources are, there is a film called Resilience that focuses on ACEs and childhood trauma. First Lady Sarah Stitt has really taken on this film and has been showing it regionally across our state. It just helps you get a better understanding of what ACEs are and what trauma-informed care looks like and how we can meet the needs in our schools for that. It is shown with a private license only, but if you get on and Google Resilience Film in Oklahoma, you should be able to find some of the upcoming showings that they have. There's also a great film that's by the same production company called Paper Tigers. It focuses in on Lincoln High School, which is in Walla Walla, Washington, and Lincoln is an alternative high school. And they become a trauma-informed school and use a lot of these trauma-informed approaches within their alternative education program. If you have Amazon Prime, you're able to get on and watch that film for free. It really applies to your area of work. And so I'm hoping that maybe through that and through the conversation we've had today, you'll find something that you can reflect on or take back to use in your program. These are the trainings that our team are able to provide at your school. So we can come in and talk about PBIS, we can do trauma-informed training, social emotional training, and some more of the prevention services that we offer. These are our regions. So depending on where you're joining us from today, you can find your region on the map. And then over here, you can find your regional specialist. And then my contact information will come up again on the next slide. And if you need to get in contact with Heather, Jenna, or Amanda, just ask me and I'll be glad to share their information with you. So, thank you so much for participating today. If you have any questions, now is a great time to ask. You can post them in the group chat or you can email me in your own time. Thank you.